What's up everybody, and welcome to a new video. And in this video we're going to go over my notes for dictionaries in Python. So here the first note is a definition. So I define a dictionary to be a collection of key value pairs. So for example, let's create here a dictionary for a customer. So we're going to say here customer, and then the way that you create a dictionary is with these curly braces. And then you first specify the key. So in our case, let's for example say that we want the name of the customer. And then after that key, you put the colon and then you specify the value. So let's say the name here is Joe. So that's now one key value pair. And if you want to have multiple within the dictionary, then you can separate those with a comma. So let's then here also say age. So the age, let's say that is 53. And then let's make a third key value pair. And let's call this here newsletter subscription. And let's set that to true. So now if I run this, then we have created here this dictionary. So this is how I define a dictionary and how they are denoted. And here I also have some additional notes. And the first one states that keys must be unique, i.e. you can't have two keys that are the same. So for example, if I create here a variable called dictionary, and then here create a dictionary, and the first key value pair is a 1, and then the value is here hello. And now let's create another key value pair. And again, let's use the 1 as the key. And here, let's say a word. So now if I run this, then you can see we can run it. So we don't get an error. However, if I now print out the dictionary here, then you can see that it actually only contains one key value pair, which is here this last one. So this is what I mean that, by that keys must be unique. And this also applies when the keys are of different types, but nonetheless represent the same value. So for example, to show that, I've prepared here this dictionary. So here I have a 1 as an integer as a key. Here's a 1 as a float. This is a 1 as a complex number. And here we have the Boolean value true, which is also interpreted as a 1. And now again, if I run this, then we don't get an error. However, if we look at the dictionary, then we can see again that it only contains one key value pair, which is again just this last one here. Okay, so this is why keys must be unique. Then the next note states that keys can only be immutable objects. And we will talk about mutability when we talk about here the miscellaneous topics. And then here we have mutability. So if you don't know what that is, then I will put a link to that video into the video description. But now I just want to show what that means for keys in dictionaries. Namely, all data types and tuples can be used as keys. So to show that, I've prepared here this example dictionary. So here I'm using an integer as a key, a float, a complex number, a string, a Boolean value, the none value, and then here a tuple. And now if I run this, then you can see that we don't get an error. And if I print out this dictionary, then you can see that we still have all those key value pairs. So as you can see, all data types and tuples can be used as keys. However, lists, dictionaries, and sets can't be used as keys. So for example, if I create here a dictionary and then use a list as a key, and then let's simply use here as a value the 1. And now if I try to run this, then you can see we get here a type error because we have an unhashable type, which is a list. And now here, if I, for example, transform that into a set, then you can see that we again get this type error. This time we have an unhashable type set. And if I make this here a dictionary, then again we get this type error, unhashable type dictionary. So this is what I mean by that you can use lists, dictionaries, and sets as keys. And then here I also have a side note. And this states that tuples can be used as keys if they contain mutable objects. So for example, here we use the tuple as a key. However, now if I put this 2 here into a list, and now if I run this, then again we get here a type error because we have an unhashable type, which is this list here. Okay, so that's the side note. And this is what I mean by that keys can only be immutable objects. Then the next note states that values can be any Python object. And to show that, I've prepared here this code example. So here I'm importing the math module, I'm defining a function, creating here a class, and then here we have a dictionary where I used here an integer as a value, a float, a complex number, a string, a Boolean value, the none value, a list, a tuple, a dictionary, a set, and then here this function, the class, and then here this module. And now if I run this, then you can see we don't get an error. And if I print out this dictionary, then you can see that we still have all those key value pairs. So as you can see, any Python object can be used as a value. And then here I also have some side notes. And the first one states that dictionaries can be empty. So for example, if I create here a variable called empty dictionary, and then to create a dictionary, you simply use those braces here. And we can check if that's actually a dictionary by using this built-in function type and then put in our empty dictionary. And then here, as you can see, this is actually a dictionary. Okay, so that's the first side note. And the second one states that in contrast to lists and tuples, dictionaries are unordered. And to show what I mean by that, I've prepared here these two lists. So here we have list 1 and list 2. The first one contains the values 1 and 2, and the second one contains the values 2, 1. So it's then the other way around. So now if I say here list 1, is that equal to list 2? Then we get here false because they are not the same. However, if we now do a similar thing with dictionaries, so here I have dictionary 1 and 2. So in the first dictionary, we will first specify a key here as a 1, and then the value is hello. And then we specify the key 2 with the value word. And for dictionary 2, we do it the other way around. So we first specify key 2, and then here the value is word. And then here we specify key 1, where the value is again hello. So now, what if we then say dictionary 1, is that equal to dictionary 2? Then in this case, we get here true because they are considered to be the same. And that's because they have the same key value pairs and the order of those key value pairs doesn't matter. So this is what I mean by the dictionaries are unordered. Okay, so these are the side notes. And with that, now we've covered all the notes that I want to cover with respect to defining dictionaries and how they are denoted. Then the next notes are about interacting with a dictionary. And here the first note is about how to access a value of a dictionary. So to show that, I've prepared here this customer dictionary. So here now, let's say that we want to access the name of that customer. So the way that you would do that is by saying then here customer, and then you use brackets, and in those brackets you put in the key that you want to access. So in our case, that would be then the name of the customer. So if I run this, then you can see that we get here Joe. So this is what happens when the key is available. Now let's see what happens if the key is actually not available in our dictionary. So for example, let's say here customer and then brackets, and then we're going to say address. So now if I run this, then you can see we get here a key error because the key address is not here in our dictionary. Okay, so this is how to access a value. Then the next note is about how to create a new entry. So let's say that we want to add an address for our customer here. So the way that you would do that is by saying your customer address, and then that equals to whatever value you want to specify. So for example, let's simply say here some street. And now if I run this, then we don't get an error. And if I print out here our dictionary, then you can see we have this new entry here where the key is address and the value is some street. Okay, so that's how to create a new entry. Now let's see how to update an existing entry. So let's say the customer moves to a different street and we want to update the address. So the way that we do that here is in the same way. So here we can then simply, for example, then say some other street. So the customer address equals some other street. So now if I run this and then print out the dictionary, then you can see that this value here was updated. Okay, so that's how to update an existing entry. And now let's see how to delete an existing entry. So let's say that we want to delete the address again. So therefore, you then simply use this del keyword, and then you specify which key you want to delete. So in our case, that would be then customer, and then here address. So now if I run this and then print out the customer again, then you can see that the address is deleted. And now let's just quickly see what happens if we try to delete a key that is not in the dictionary. So therefore, let's simply run now this cell here again. So if I try to run it again, then we get again this key error because the address is not a key in our dictionary. Okay, so this is how you can interact with a dictionary. Then the next note is about available methods for dictionaries. And here I group them into these categories. And the first one is about accessing elements. And here the first method is called get. And with that you can access a value of a dictionary. So for example, to show that, let's use again here this customer dictionary. And now let's say that we want to access the name of that customer. So therefore then we would simply say customer get, and then here we specify the key. So in our case, that would be name. And this then returns Joe. So this is how this method works when the key exists. So now let's see what happens when the key doesn't exist. So therefore, let's say here customer.get, and then let's use again the address. So now if I run this, then you can see nothing happens. And what actually happens is that this method here returns a none. So I can show that, for example, by printing out the return value of that method. And then here you can see that this is none. So in contrast to manually accessing a value, this method here doesn't throw an error. So for example, earlier we used this approach here where we said customer and then brackets and then address. So if I run this, then we get here this key error. So depending on your use case, this get method here might be more appropriate. And here we also have an additional parameter, namely that's this default parameter. And with that you can specify what value the function should return if the key doesn't exist. So for example, if I set this here to 0, then it actually returns here a 0. Okay, so that is the get method. Then with the next methods, you can access the keys of a dictionary, the values, or both. So let's start here with the keys. So therefore, let's again use here this customer dictionary. So now if I say here customer.keys, then you can see that we get here this dict keys object, which contains here all the keys of our dictionary. And some potential use cases for that would be, for example, looping. So you can loop over all the keys of a dictionary. So you can say for key in customer.keys. And then here, let's simply print out the key. So if I run this, then you can see that we can print out or loop over the keys and print them out. Then the next potential use case is testing membership. So you can test if a certain key is in the dictionary. So for example, if we say here name in customer.keys, then we get here a true. So that's how you can use it for testing membership. And then lastly, you can also use it to create a list of the keys. So for example, if I simply run here customer.keys, then we get this dict keys object. However, if we simply transform that into a list, then we have here a list of the available keys. And you can do the same thing for the values. So for example, if I say here customer.values, then we get here the dict values object where we have all the values available. And here again, you can use that for looping, testing membership, or creating a list of the respective keys. And then here with this items method, the output looks like this. So if we say customer.items, then we get here the dict items object, and here we have tuples with the keys and then the respective value. And here again, you can use that for looping, testing membership, and creating a list of those key value pairs. And here now, just as a side note, this keys method you actually don't need to use because that's the default behavior for dictionaries. So for example, if I delete this here, So if you then here simply say for key and customer, then we can also loop over the keys. Then here, if I also delete it here, if I say name and customer, we also get here true, so we can test the membership. Or here, if I delete it here and then simply say list of customer, then we get also here the list for the keys. Okay, so this is, these are the available nodes for methods for accessing different elements of a dictionary. Then the next category is about adding or removing elements from a dictionary. And here the first method is called update. And with that you can either update an existing entry or you can also create a new entry in your dictionary. So to demonstrate that, let's again use here this customer dictionary. So here then let's say customer.update, and here one way you can update a dictionary is by passing in here another dictionary. And then here let's say that we want to update the age, so we want to increase it by 1 year to 54. So therefore then we simply say here age, and then let's set this to 54. And then let's also create a new entry. So here then let's say again address, and let's set this again to some street. So now if I print out here the dictionary, then you can see that the age here was updated, and we have also created this new entry here with the address and then some street. So this is one way of using this update method here with a dictionary. However, you can also do it in another way by simply providing a list of tuples. So therefore then here in the first tuple, let's add in here the age. And then the second value is going to be our value for the dictionary. So it is 54. And then we create here another tuple for the address. And then here the value for that address is some street. So now if I run these cells here again, then you can see that the age is again updated, and we've created this new entry here with address and then some street. So this is how the update method can be used. Then the next method is called pop. And with that, you can simply remove an entry from a dictionary. So for example, let's say that we want to delete this address here again. So therefore then we would simply say customer.pop, and then we provide the key that we want to delete. So in our case, that would be address. So now if I run this, then it returns here some street, so the value for that key. And now if I print out here the customer dictionary again, then you can see that the address is deleted. So this is how this function or this method behaves when the key exists. So now let's also see what happens when the key doesn't exist. So therefore, let's simply run here the cell again. Namely, in this case, then we get a key error because the key address is not in our dictionary here. So, however, how you can get around it is by using this optional parameter here. Namely, you can specify a default value, which the function should return in case the key doesn't exist. So for example, if we set this here to 0, then the function or the method actually returns a 0 instead of throwing an error. So this is how we can use the pop method. Then the next method is called popitem, and with that you can remove the last item that was added to the dictionary, i.e. the last key value pair. So to show that, let's again use here this customer dictionary, and then here let's say customer.pop item. And now if I run this, then you can see that it returns here this tuple where we have here the key newsletter subscription and then its respective value, which is true. And that's because this is the last key value pair that was added to this dictionary. And then let's also here print out the dictionary. Namely, here you can then see that this newsletter subscription entry was deleted. So now if I run this here again, then you can see this time it returned age and 53, which was then deleted from the dictionary. So then if I run it in another time, then we get here name and Joe, and then the dictionary is empty. So now let's see what happens when we run this method here with an empty dictionary. Namely, in that case, then we get a key error because the dictionary is empty. Okay, so that's popitem. And then the last method here is called clear. So with that, you can simply clear a dictionary, i.e. you can delete all the key value pairs. So for example, if I then say here customer.clear and then run this and then print out this dictionary, then you can see that it is now empty. Okay, so those are all the available methods for adding or removing elements from a dictionary. Then the next category is called mutability. And here we only have this copy method. And again, if you don't know what mutability is, then I will put a link to the respective video into the video description. But now I just want to show what this copy method here does. So therefore, I've prepared here these variables. So here we have variables A, B, C. A is set equal to this dictionary. Then here we say B equals A, and here we say C equals a copy of A. So now to see what this copy method does, let's print out all the IDs of those variables here. So for example, let's then say print ID of A, and then let's also do the same thing for B and C. And now if I run this, then you can see that A and B have the same ID, whereas C has a different ID. So what's happening here is when we say A is equal to this dictionary, is that this dictionary here gets created and then stored in a specific location in memory, and then A simply points at that dictionary. And then here, when we say B equals A, what happens is that B here simply points at whatever A is pointing at. So it's also pointing at this dictionary. So therefore then we have here the same IDs. And then here, however, when we say C equals a copy of A, what's happening here is that this copy method here creates a copy of this dictionary, and this copy is then stored in a different location in memory. And then C is pointing at that different location. So that's why then we get here a different ID. Okay, so this is how this copy method works. And then the last category is simply called other. And here the first method is called setDefault. And with that, you can set a default value for a given key. So to show that, I've prepared here this dictionary. So let's copy and paste that. So here we have a key 1 and the value is 1. And now let's say that we want to create another key, so key 2, and set that to a specific default value. So therefore, then we say here dictionary.setDefault, and here then we create key, let's say key 2. And now if we run it like this and then print out the dictionary, then you can see that this key 2 here was created and it was set to the value none. However, you can also specify what that default value should be. So to show that, let me copy here the cell, and then let's say here key 3, and then let's say the value or the default value should be 3. So now if I run this and then print out here the dictionary again, then you can see that we have here now key 3 and it's set to the value 3. So this is how setDefault basically works. And an example use case for that would be to implement a counter. So to show that, I've prepared here this code snippet. So here we have the variable word, which is hello. Then here we initiate the counter, which is simply an empty dictionary. Then here we loop over the letters here in this word. So we say for character in word. And then here we check if character is not in our counter already, then we initiate that character and set it equal to 0. And here we simply then increase the counter by 1. So now if I run this, then we get here this dictionary where we can see that there's one H, that there's one E, 2 L's and 1 O. So this is when we implement it without using the setDefault method. However, with the setDefault method, we can make this a little bit shorter here. Namely, we can delete this if statement. And then here we can simply say counter.setDefault. And then here the key is going to be the character. And the default value is then simply going to be 0. So now if I run this again, then we get the same result where there's one H, one E, 2 L's and then 1 O. So this is the setDefault method. And then the last method is called fromkeys. And some example use cases for that would be, for instance, to create a dictionary from a list or any other iterable, and then all keys will have the same default value. So for example, therefore I have prepared here this code snippet. So here we have a variable called keys, which is simply a list containing those strings here. And then here we have this variable called dictionary, which is simply an empty dictionary. So now if I say here dictionary dot from keys and then put in our keys variable here, then if I run this, then we get here the following dictionary where we have here our keys from this list, and each key is set to the default value none. And you can also specify what that default value should be. So for example, if I say here comma 0, then all those keys have now the value 0 here. So that's the first use case. Another one would be to reset all the values of an existing dictionary to a default value. So to show that, let's again use here this customer dictionary. And now let's say that we want to reset this dictionary to a default value. So we want to reset all those values here. So therefore then we can simply say customer.fromKeys. And then here we simply put in the customer dictionary again. So now if I run this, then all those values here are now reset to none. And again, here we could also then specify what that default value should be. So for example, if I set it to 0, then all those values are now reset to 0. Okay, so this is fromkeys. And with that, now we've covered all the available methods for dictionaries. And with that, we've covered all my notes for dictionaries in Python. So we've reached the end of this video. And then in the next video, we will go over my notes for sets in Python. So thanks for watching, and hopefully I will see you in the next video.